Hello, BookTube. Well, I asked for questions, and once again, despite the fact that I am fairly boring, a very tedious old man, I got tons and tons of questions. So we're going to see how many we can get done in one presentable length video. I don't know how many videos this will take up. It's quite a few questions, so we're just going to go straight through them. Let me see. I am rewording some of the questions for concision, and I'm skipping some questions that are self-evident or that answer themselves, but I think I got everything. So let's see here. Through the Enchanted Portal asks, what was one of your favorite toys when you were a kid? I had the standard array of stuffed animals and teddy bears and whatnot, I'm sure, but for me, my favorite toys were alive. They were my playmates who were available in all weathers at all times to do anything that we wanted. So I spent a lot of time with dogs. JPD Manchester asks, what's your opinion of a non-fiction paperback release advertised as fully updated with extra chapters, etc., that sort of thing? I'm sure you've seen things like that. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it just a cash grab on the part of the publishing? It's almost never, in my opinion, really justified. Some publishers think, well, you know, we have a paperback release coming out. Those are hard enough to sell to the audience. We want to capture a fraction of the audience that bought the hardcover instead of just writing them all off and selling this to people who couldn't afford the hardcover. And that's hard to do if it's an exact duplication. I usually don't fall for it myself. I usually, unless it's something serious, I usually don't pay any attention to it at all. I certainly don't view it as an occasion to review that new paperback. The only exception I can think of is that, as some of you know, if you're writers, sometimes a book just doesn't let you go. You just aren't happy with it. You want to add to it, or if it's, for instance, a vital in the news subject that's constantly updating, then you want to circumvent people wondering how relevant is this book by adding a chapter on some new event. I see those sorts of things, but I'm leery of it. I think it's mostly just a way to make the paperback financially viable. Flower Child asks, you've never eaten a cannoli. That is true. I have never eaten a cannoli. Elena Nicolina asks if I know of any Brattle-style used bookstores in Glasgow or Edinburgh, and I don't. I have been to used bookstores. In fact, a great rambling old cavernous thing in Edinburgh, but it was long before your parents were born, so I'm sure it's not there anymore. And she also wants to know if I have any interesting stories to tell about Scotland. I do. I don't know about interesting. That might be going a bit far, but I have a lot of stories to tell about Scotland. I tramped over every single inch of the country's wilderness in the company of a large crowd of dogs, but I have almost no stories to tell about Edinburgh or Glasgow. I mean, in Edinburgh, I did all the usual things. I've been there a few times, and I saw the sights. That's one of the usual things. If you're a man of a certain age, then another one of the usual things is to get blind, staggering drunk. I did that as well. So, but most of my time spent in Scotland was not spent in cities, or in very small towns. Let's see here. John Bull says, any recommendations for books on the Arab-Israeli conflict? And do you think finding an objective source detailing the history of this ugly conflict is a fool's errand? So go in reverse order. It is certainly not a fool's errand ever to search for an objective and sensible account of anything, no matter how vexed a subject it is. And in the present day, you don't get any more vexed than this subject. But I think, I know it's a bit of a cop-out. I'm going to have to do it a few times in these questions, but I think I should relegate a list of books to a starter kit. Because this is a huge subject. Whole libraries have been written on it, from one angle, from the other angle, from the space alien completely objective angle, and so on and so forth. The subject itself is not that hard. It's not that hard. And it that means that the books, you go into them just sort of scratching your head. The books, if you read the books without really knowing the subject, you could easily be given the impression from them that the subject is hard. The subject is not hard at all. The subject is very simple. We're talking about a war, a land theft, and an ongoing international crime. and nobody wants to talk about that. So the books, because I will make a whole video on the Arab-Israeli conflict and watch it get flagged. I'll do my first video ever that gets flagged. Let's see here. Andrew Cole says, any advice on how to learn a second language? Yes, I do. I do have advice on how to learn a second language. It's the way you learned your first language. People always say, well, you know, I would love to learn a language, but I'm not a kid anymore. Kids are so much better at learning languages than adults are. Kids aren't better at anything than adults are. The kids' brains haven't even fully formed. No, the reason that children pick up languages with what seems to be a very fast ease is because they absolutely have to. If you're 2 feet tall and you desperately want that thing up on the counter, you need to know the word for I want that thing. And if you don't know those words, long before you know those words, you know that you don't know those words. And if you don't know those words, then it becomes a matter of extreme urgency that you learn those words. So my advice to learning a language is use it. No, don't just learn it. If you learn it detached in a classroom type setting, where it's a set of tapes or an actual classroom, and then you walk out of the classroom, it'll be forever and it will always be an artificial thing. You have to use it. If you use it, then you will acquire it very quickly. I know this from first-hand experience. Although I think there is some validity to the informal contention that some people's brains are just wired to acquire language, just like some people's brains are wired to conceive math. I think that might be true. Certainly it has been the case where I have been in traveling company of very intelligent people, far more intelligent than I am. We go to a new country, and in a week I know how to talk, and they don't. In 2 weeks I know how to converse, and they don't. And so it can't just be a function of intelligence. But still, use it. That's how you learn a language. You use it. And Andrew Cole also asked, what's your favorite book that you haven't read in English? That is a long list. I don't know what the favorite one would be. I think a lot of my favorites have been translated into English, but it's the number of books I've read without reading them ever in English is very long. Especially for some reason French books. I don't know why that is. You'd think that, I mean, French was forever a schoolroom staple of language learning, even in famously monoglot America. But a lot of great stuff that I've read in French has never been translated into English. But most of my favorite books have been. And he also asked, do you have any remorse for torturing our poor TBRs? No, I don't. Let's see here. Lisa Garrity has a lot of questions. Let's see. What is your favorite book about dogs? It's tough to say. We mentioned the other day on a library tour Rick Bass's book, Coulter. That might be it. But there are a number of others that are... It depends on what kind of dog book you're talking about, too. A dog memoir where an author's writing about one particular dog, or a book about someone's life with dogs, like Gary Paulson's My Life in Dog Years, or something like that, or The Dogs Who Came to Stay, or whether you're talking about a scientific book, a natural history book about dogs, like there are quite a few good ones, like Inside a Dog and the sequel that count, but probably in terms of just prose would probably be Coulter. Let's see here. What do you think of Patrick White, his novels Voss or Riders in the Chariot? I read them. They used to have orange spine Penguin Classics, and I read them. I know that he's venerated. I know that he's a world figure, a figure on the world literature stage. But they didn't do anything for me at all. I don't know why that is, and I also don't carve that in stone, because it was a long time ago that I read him. So I almost certainly am due for a new whack at him, especially those two that you named, Voss and Riders in the Chariot. And the thing that will push me over, I'm sure, as we've seen on this channel, will be that somebody, whether it be Penguin Classics or somebody else, will come out with a new edition of those books, and those editions will come to me, and it will be that's how flexible my current reading is. If it comes to me in the mail, I will read it. So sooner or later, I mean, he's a prime candidate. Sooner or later, somebody will make a new introduction to his works and come out with new editions, and there I'll be right there. She also asked, do you think global media is erasing regional genres? Is there really a distinctive Canadian, Australian, or American voice any longer, or just books set in those locations? That's a tough one. It's a very good question. I think it might be true. that not so that social media, but also the internet. I think it might be true that as the distance between these countries lessens, certainly 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it would have been easy to spot, to differentiate an American novel from a British novel from an Australian novel written in the exact same year, let's say 1948. That would have been easy to do 50 years ago. Now, maybe not. A lot of these people cross their country borders in order to go to writing school. Most of them have to appeal to an international audience in order to float their boat. So it could be that some regional distinctions like that are disappearing. Although the publishing industry loves them, so I don't think they're going anywhere forever. The publishing industry likes nothing better than to tag a book as a quintessential such and such a book. And of course, for the last few years, the publishing industry has been head over heels. I'm mailing you a blank contract. Don't just sign your name. Also sign how much you want. In love with anything from Nigeria. Anything at all from Nigeria. So you have publishing executives high up on the ranks of major publishing houses wondering if they can we find a Nigerian. And also one infamous story that I'm not sure I believe, it sounds apocryphal, but it also sounds too good to be true, which is a publishing poobah along those levels saying, isn't our janitor a Nigerian? Do we know if she writes anything? We've got rap music in the background on a Sunday. I don't recognize it. Let's see here. She also asked, do you have a favorite Sixth Sense book? I don't know what this means. And also a book that you thought was one thing that you realized was something else entirely. Not really, no, because my stock and trade now is to deal with books from the angle of the publisher. So I usually get a pretty good, thorough heads up about a book before I start reading it. Let's see here. Carlos says, what is my opinion on Roberto Colasso? I've never really liked him. I've never really liked him. I think his books just palaver. They just wander. They seem to me to be bloated and pointless. Almost all of them. In fact, all the ones that I've read by him seem to be bloated and pointless. And do I have any fond memories of the Boston Celtics in their heyday of the 1980s? I'm afraid not. No, I've never been a Celtics fan. The only opinions that I would have of him of them from roughly that time period would be remembering, maybe a little fondly, what an absolutely stinking, filthy hole Boston Garden used to be, the place where the Celtics used to play. It's now, I don't even know, TD Bank North Garden or Tweet if you love salsa garden or whatever it's called. It used to be just plain old Boston Garden. It was this big, ugly, shambly box of a building. And the place where the teams all played up above might have been fine, fit for visiting dignitaries. But the ground floor was the hub for incoming commuter trains, and it was disgusting. Just disgusting. So that is my primary memory of the Boston Garden in the 1980s, which is when the Celtics had their heyday. Let's see here. Jack Ivoniuk says, have you always slept for only a few hours a day? Yes, I have, even from when I was a baby. Can it be garnered? Can a normal person learn to do it? I don't think so. Most humans seem to be absolutely wired for 7 to 8 hours a day, and to undergo serious physiological harm if they don't do that, which is why you'll see a million self-help gurus, a million self-help channels, a million self-help books lately in the age of the internet, where you have the pulsing neon blue screen with you at all times. The number of self-help venues has quintupled, saying you really should pay attention to getting enough sleep, because now you're more tempted than ever not to. You really should pay attention to it because it's vital, and that makes sense. There are all sorts of international rights tribunals that say that sleep deprivation is definitely a form of torture. So I don't think there's any way that it can be learned. No, it's just a question of your natural wiring. And I also wouldn't push it. You know, I'm perfectly free to tell jokes on this channel about how horrifying it seems to me that all the rest of you go comatose for a third of your day every day. But it doesn't pay to push it. If your body needs that, then you're hurting yourself if you don't give it. And he also wants to know if I ever read Euclid's Elements. And I have. Yes. You can take a wild guess as to how much of it I understood, but I have read it, yes. And Ancient Yokunda asks, One of my favorite movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And of course, the first impulse that I have here is just to immediately say Avengers Endgame, because what a movie. Oh my God, what a movie. but mainly that's for wowza effect. That climactic scene where everyone returns in Avengers Endgame is alone worth the price of admission, and I was as wowed as anybody else. But in terms of movies, I was thinking about this now that as far as I'm concerned, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is over. As far as I'm concerned, the Marvel Cinematic Universe needed Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. And obviously, the showrunners for that universe thought the same thing, because this whole big, enormous, multi-part phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe began and ended with Tony Stark's Iron Man. So I'm going to consider that a separate thing. I have no idea what Marvel movies are going to do from here on out. And I think I will probably be a little less interested. I don't think I'll be the only one, but my favorite movies, oddly enough, are the Captain America movies. I think they're superb. I think they when it comes to, like, for instance, I've been invited many times. I've turned them down because I don't want to do such a thing. But I've been invited many times to Marvel Cinematic Universe marathons by friends who said, we're having some people over. We're going to have pillows and blankets. We're going to have tons of wine, tons of food, and we're going to run all the Marvel movies together. So we're going to come over for a day and just watch Marvel movies. And I've always turned that down. But when I've thought about it, I've thought, well, a lot of them I wouldn't want to watch too many more times, if ever. Scenes, moments, bits and pieces. There's scarcely a Marvel movie that doesn't have a scene or a moment that is absolutely first rate. But when it comes to watching a movie from start to finish all over again, the Captain America movies do it for me in a way that the others don't. So I'm thinking that's probably it. What do you think? 17 minutes long enough for one of these? I don't know. Let's wrap this up, and we'll start over again. We'll just do as many of these as necessary. Sorry, but I'll be right back.